Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Clark Wade, a member of your Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining us here today beneath the beacon and on Facebook Live. That's Facebook Live. Whether you are a member or a friend of our congregation, or whether you join us every Sunday or only occasionally, or whether we have known you for decades, or whether you have met us for the first time today, or whether you are with us under the beacon or join us from afar, you are welcome here. Acknowledging your color, ancestry, expression of gender, your net worth, your political opinions, and the people you love, and the long and winding journey that brought you here this morning, you are welcome. May this be a time of reflection and renewal, a time to live into our mission to love, revere, discover, and connect. Please open your hymnals, number 99. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. And follow the words as the choir sings.
And as always, it is an honor to serve you this morning as we join together in the fellowship of the Spirit. I'd like to begin our time together by reflecting on some words by Reverend Gretchen Haley. Give up the fight for some other moment, some other life, than here and now. Give up the longing for some other world, the wishing, the other choices to make, other songs to sing, other bodies, other ages, other countries, other stakes. Purge the past, forgive the future, for each come too soon. Surrender only to this life, this day, this hour. Not because it does not constantly break your heart, but because it also beckons with beauty, startles with delight. if only we keep waking up. This is the gift we have been given. These body clothes, this heartbreak, this pulse, this breath, this light, these friends, this hope. Here we remember ourselves, all a part of it all, giving thanks and centering joy. Come, let us worship together. We kindle a flame of power, illuminating the holy in each of our faces. We recognize in the flame a passionate commitment to our shared faith. We are held and carried from day to day, week to week, in the shining of the light. This flame is mine as well as yours. We are brought together on this day, called to growth, to expansion within its glow. So, the seasons are changing, right? It's sweater weather. It's cozy time. And I brought to you today a couple of messages on regret. So, hopefully the coziness that you feel will help get us through some of the more challenging ideas that we have to think about this time of year. For our Time for All Ages, I'm going to read you a very short Zen parable. It's the parable of the muddy road. And I'd like you to consider this as we begin working together this morning. Muddy road. Tanzan and Aikido were once traveling together down a muddy road. A heavy rain was still falling. Coming around the bend, they met a lovely girl in a silk kimono and sash, and she was unable to cross the muddy intersection. "Come on, girl," said Tanzan at once. Lifting her in his arms, he carried her over the mud. Aikido did not speak. Aikido did not speak again until later that night when they reached a lodging temple. Then, no longer able to restrain himself, Aikido said, "We monks don't go near females," he told Tanzan, "especially not young and lovely ones. It's dangerous. Why did you do that?" "I left the girl there," said Tanzan. "Are you still carrying her?"
We come now to the part of the service where we hold on to and lift up the things that we are carrying from our week, our month, our year, and perhaps all of our lives. The milestones of our lives, the joys that keep us going, and the difficult things that have brought us down and that perhaps we might need to let go of. I invite you at this time to hold on to a stone. If you brought one with you this morning or grabbed one from the bowl at the top of the aisle, I also invite you to grab a stone right now if you do not have one currently. Usually at this point, I would read from the book that is kept on the pedestal out in the narthex, the book in which we place those joys and cares that we wish to be read aloud so that we can all hold them together. I will not be doing that today simply because no one has written anything for me to read. So, for all those joys and cares that you hold in your hearts, I invite you to hold on to this stone and reflect on them as we observe a moment of silence. When I sound the singing bowl, I invite you to join me in placing these stones in the bowl at the center of our worship space beneath our beacon, so that they may be held together as a part of this community and eventually returned to our landscape.
Please join me in a moment of prayer. Spirit of life, Spirit of mercy, Spirit of everlasting joy, we lift up these burdens, we lift up these joys. Spirit of life, may you teach us to care for one another, to lighten the burdens, and celebrate one another, to magnify the joys. Amen.
To
I found Unitarian Universalism early in my sobriety. Unitarian Universalism opened a door to an amazing community of love and care that I needed more than I knew. However, what kept me coming back was our commitment to social justice. Here I was, a young, religiously wounded gay man who not only found a church that accepted him, but found an entire religious movement willing to affirm my existence and fight for my rights. And as is the experience shared by many of us in this room, I learned that justice work could nourish my soul. So I dove into social justice with both feet. When I wasn't educating myself on the various oppressions of the world, I was writing letters. When I wasn't writing letters, I was climbing into my Facebook pulpit and preaching the good news of love, acceptance, and justice, while fiercely condemning those who espoused hatred, intolerance, and injustice. The work we do here in our congregations as Unitarian Universalists is unique because our faith calls us to a profound and precious relationship with this concept we call universal love. We do this work because we know that we are part of a vastly interconnected web of existence, such that there really is no such thing as them. There is only truly an us. So earlier in my career, when I was in my first year of seminary, I was given the privilege of delivering the Thanksgiving sermon at my home congregation down in Orlando, Florida. My topic arose out of this somewhat frenzied spiritual awakening around justice and interconnection. My premise for that sermon? Thanksgiving is rooted in colonialism, oppression, and murder of indigenous peoples. We base the holiday we celebrate today on a fairy tale we tell our children to make them complacent in reaping the continuous rewards of our great sin. Oh, and by the way, Squanto wasn't even really named Squanto, and his primary concern wasn't saving a bunch of white people from a cold winter. Simple message, right? Full of love and compassion. I came out the gate at full sprint and proceeded to scold the entire congregation for 25½ minutes. It was not one of my finer moments. Before that sermon, I had grown accustomed to walking into coffee hour and hearing compliments on my message and kind words about what a fine minister I would be someday. Following that sermon, I walked into coffee hour and saw frustration, shame, and cringy discomfort on the faces of my beloved community. Now, in my defense, my views on Thanksgiving are a lot more nuanced today, but that sermon was well researched, it was pretty easy to follow, and from a purely social justice standpoint, it was true. And yet, for a very long time, I regretted giving that sermon. So we're coming into that fateful Thanksgiving season again. And each year, about this time, my mind wanders back to that sermon. What had gone wrong? More like, at this point, what had gone right? But what had gone wrong? It wasn't until a year or two later that a professor in seminary laid out an absolutely golden nugget of truth. Now, he was misquoting the Buddha, but he suggested nonetheless that an excellent sermon answers 4 crucial questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And does it improve upon the silence? Was my sermon true? Yes. We celebrate a highly curated version of our national history that paints us in a very glowing light and it does disregard much of the damage we caused upon our arrival. That is true, unfortunately. Was my sermon necessary? Nope. This exact learning moment was happening over on the Social Justice Committee. It was all over Facebook, and it was also a topic of an enrichment program that had already happened that month before I even climbed up into that pulpit. It was not necessary. Was it kind? Unfortunately, no. It was smug. It was me showing off how woke and evolved I wanted everyone to think that I was. That sermon fed my own ego. Did it improve upon the silence? It did not. That message filled the silence. It left no space for us to listen for divine inspiration. To become more aware of Spirit moving through us and moving through the collected congregation. My message pushed that silence right out the door. So on that day, my sermon failed on 3 out of 4 basic levels. And I was filled with regret. So who here today has a moment in their lives that they regret? Now, I'm not going to ask anyone to give any details, but if you feel courageous and want to admit that just simply there is a moment in your life that you regret, raise your hand. Okay. It's common. Now, this phenomenon of regret is a funny thing. Complex thing. And right here in Ohio, down at Miami University, there is an entire psychology lab dedicated to regrets. And they call it the Regret Lab. Psychologist Amy Somerville leads the lab, and her hypothesis is that regret is based on rumination. Rumination is when we continue to bring up memories again and again. Sort of like how my regretful sermon keeps popping up for me every Thanksgiving. Now, the word rumination is based on the thing cows do to digest their food, where they actually kind of chuck it up and chew it over again and swallow. And I think when it comes to regrets, that root is fitting. Now, Somerville theorizes that regrets rely on a lingering what-if proposition that we create in our minds. We aren't happy with what actually happened, so we imagine, what if the event had gone differently? Now, the enticing thing about these fantasy possibilities is that our brain imagines that they could have happened. The what-ifs live in the same part of our brain that makes to-do lists. Again, literally lists of possible things that could happen on a to-do list. This potential is appealing because it eases the pain of what actually happened by suggesting that it could have happened another way. In my case, I could have written an entirely different Thanksgiving sermon. The thing didn't have to happen the way it did. Now, to paraphrase Somerville, what if regrets are a way to understand our experiences and an attempt to bring control to things that feel uncontrollable? We don't like the idea that bad things happen with no reason and without the possibility to predict them. So why an entire sermon on regret? Why not a happy sermon about Tom Turkey and the warmth of family sitting around a Thanksgiving dinner table? Well, honestly, as a chaplain, I am fascinated by painful emotions. And I have noticed that we humans spend a lot more time on the negative emotions than we do seeking out the positive emotions. We humans spend an awful lot of time dealing with our emotional and spiritual pain. It's one of the reasons we come together in community to support one another. So just think about the holiday season ahead. How many of our beloved traditions do we build on bittersweet nostalgia? Now, in my family, we have an entire cabinet of dinnerware that we only use for Thanksgiving and Christmas. We have the massive turkey platter that my grandpa used to serve a 22-pound turkey on every single year. We have the serving bowls that my grandma found at Carlisle's department store, she will tell you, big enough to serve all 33 of us at once. We use silver service that my Nana collected one piece at a time, gifts that she would get at the bank for making deposits. One fork, one spoon, one pie server at a time. Every year when my mom puts up the Christmas tree, she hauls out this box of seriously homely and time-worn ornaments. The tree is not complete without ornaments that remind us of the people we lost. The year Papa died. The year Nana's heart was failing. So even in this most joyful season of celebration, our grief, loss, and regrets companion our joy. So digging a little more deeply into the regrets, so often we find even more troubling emotions under those regrets. Regret can be an umbrella for guilt and shame. This is why I feel that regrets merit their own sermon. Guilt and shame can really get in the way of our spiritual growth. Now, guilt and shame, they're related to one another, and they come about when we take actions that contradict our deeply held values. I'm going to go back to that sermon that I gave. Avoiding that type of sermon, our UU version of fire and brimstone, is something that I had to learn. Giving it didn't betray my values. We do need to take a good hard look at what we celebrate every November. What I regret is my tone, my delivery, and especially how I failed to listen to the congregation's needs in that moment. These are all things that I came to learn as a mature minister. So in this situation, this example, I feel regret. I regret giving that sermon, but I don't feel guilt or shame. It was just a learning moment. Now, guilt comes in when we intentionally betray our values. Guilt can be pretty tiny. We build little fences around it to help rationalize and isolate that action we took from our understanding of who we are. Another example, I stole a candy bar when I was a kid and I felt guilty. I'm not ashamed of that action because I know I'm not a thief by nature. It's not my identity. It was just an isolated mistake, and it helped me to learn morals. Now, shame is much more toxic. We can't build that fence around shame. With shame, the regret we feel for those actions we took interweaves with our identity. So perhaps you've been struggling with something like ADHD your entire life and end up missing some deadlines. Shame wraps itself in messages like, I'm weak. I lack discipline and time management. I'm broken. I should know better, and I should have seen that coming. Shame loves a should. So whether we are feeling regret, guilt, or shame, in each, we are evaluating what actually happened against a fantasy of what could have happened. Now, at the start of this sermon, I mentioned that I found Unitarian Universalism on my journey to get sober. And on that spiritual journey, ideas that I learned within our movement blend with spiritual concepts I learned in recovery. Now, 12-step recovery has a lot to say about regret. 12-step recovery gives 12-steppers plenty of tools to deal with regret. And I'm about to give you a little inside look at that process. Now, when I talk about 12-step recovery, I mean any recovery program built on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there are dozens of recovery programs that share these steps, that borrow them, dealing from everything from overeating to gambling. Now, in the 9th step, folks following a program like this are asked to take on one of the more challenging tasks, making amends for past wrongdoings. And let me tell you, by the time I got to this step, I was not looking forward to sitting down and reconciling with 2 to 3 dozen people I had indeed wronged, most very deeply. Now, thankfully, we are offered some reassuring promises at this point in the big book. And it reads, I'm going to quote it, "If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace." When I read the promises, that's when I was all in. Serenity, peace, yes please. Freedom, happiness, more of that. I had a great sponsor who was good at slowing me down. And in this instance, as I was now suddenly very excited to start doing this very challenging work, he helped me to unpack the promises. So, first, making amends. So the idea of making amends, you'll sometimes hear in these circles, clearing away the wreckage of our pasts. It's going back and trying to do right where we once did wrong. It's going back to own our part in our regrets. Now, within the promise, if we are painstaking, there's a lot of work to be done here, and we need to pay close attention to it. About this phase of our development, it's just one moment, one part of a much larger program of spiritual growth. Development. Our goal is indeed to grow and mature into a spiritual life that prepares us to live without using a substance as a crutch. Then comes the freedom, happiness, serenity, and peace. The relief promised in the text only happens after we have painstakingly done this work and grown. Now the work is that sentence right there in the middle, and it's where I got the title of our sermon today. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Now remember what we've already learned. Regret comes from comparing what actually happened in the past to a fantasy of what could have happened. And in the very practical program of AA, what could have happened doesn't matter. The past is the past. I lied to that person, or I betrayed that person's trust. I stole from that person, or I failed out of all of my classes. It is what it is. Whether I regret it or not, the past is the past. I don't regret the past because I accept it for what it really was, warts and all. But I'm also not going to shut the door on it. I need these moments to help me grow. I need to learn from my mistakes to avoid making the same mistakes again. However embarrassing or unfortunate or cruel, I cannot simply turn my back and pretend that these regrettable moments didn't happen. And in so many cases, for me, I dragged these regrets behind me for years. I was still carrying them. In doing the work of righting these wrongs, I learned to put them down. That is the freedom that the text promises. Now, I can apply this work to my relationships, and I can apply this work to my understanding of my own self. And we can all apply this kind of work to our congregational life. Owning our mistakes, accepting each other for being entirely human and entirely flawed at times, applying a little "it is what it is" to decisions the congregation as a whole has made in the past. All of this work not only exists in 12-step recovery, but it has a cozy home right in our principles. Our third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. That's our third principle. Fourth principle, individually, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. So friends, the path ahead for this congregation carries many unknowns. You are in the first part of an entire chapter on transition right now. After we came out collectively as a society from a huge period of unrest and upheaval and transition. Now, things might be looking up with this recent news about the financial help to find a new full-time minister. That's good news. But I can assure you that while finding that next great minister, and in the first year or two of that new ministry, there are going to be so many opportunities to look back. What have we done well? What has not gone well? Who were we then? Who are we now? Who do we want to be? Regrets will surface. I hope you can find some information, some inspiration in the messages that I brought to you today. From the parable of the muddy road, what might you be holding on to that others have already let go? From the world of psychology, what enticing fantasy of what could have been fuels your regret for what really happened? And from the realm of recovery and recovery from substance abuse, how are you going to embrace the past challenges to inspire continuous spiritual growth in your present? All of that is regret. Friends, I pray you will embrace the opportunities within this challenging work. And I pray you will use these moments to grow both individually and as a stronger, refreshed, and revived congregation of beloved souls. We will not regret the past, for every moment alive is truly a blessing. May it be so. Amen.
This whole building was built on what could have and should have happened. There was a lot riding on building this building and what everybody wanted it to be. And I've heard and felt often the regret that we're not what that was planned to be. But I also hear and feel the excitement about that transition into who we are now and who we will be in the future. And so I invite you to be who we are. I invite you to join as the baskets are passed around in giving as generously as you are able. Unless if this is your first time here with us today. If you are a guest here today, I invite you to let the basket pass you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your generous contributions to the wellness of East Shore. Your gifts demonstrate your stewardship of our church and make it possible for us to live our values, to love, discover, revere, and connect. As a member of the Board of Trustees, I assure you, your board will be responsible stewards of your gifts.
So before we move on to these last three elements of the order of service, I do want to point your attention to a little bit of shuffling that has happened in the order of service. A lot of conversation on the Worship Arts Committee went into thinking about how service is structured and how best to offer the service each Sunday. So I'm going to ask you that after the bond of union, that you remain attentive to extinguishing the chalice as a way to bring our service to a close. And I brought a chalice message that I'm going to read at that time. In the future moving forward, transition time, we appreciate your generosity of spirit and flexibility in rolling with some of these challenges or some of these changes that come down the pipeline. And also welcome your feedback too. So my benediction for you, friends. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Friends, may you walk into this world refreshed, renewed, and revived by the work you do in this room with these people. May you see clear-eyed. May you move open-hearted. And may you find serenity and peace in your own lives.
I invite you to stand as you are willing and able and join in reciting our bond of union.
We join hands in Unitarian Universalist, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all beliefs, not to think alike, but to journey together.
And now, as we extinguish our chalice, please hear these words. It is our work shared with each other in covenant that creates and sustains this beloved community. We extinguish this chalice, but its light lives on in the directions we have chosen today. The light of this faith lives on in us together, in our hearts, minds, body, and spirit. Amen, and blessed be.
And now that we have come to the end of this time of worship, some announcements. The Ad Hoc Committee on Reopening will meet today at 2 p.m. The next cast book discussion will occur on Tuesday the 16th at 7 p.m. On Wednesday, as always, we begin the day with the prayer circle on Facebook Live and in the chapel at 6:15 a.m. And the Finance Committee meets at 6:30 that evening. Circle of Mom will meet on Thursday at 6:30, and please take a look at your order of service for other announcements of other events coming up. But next Sunday is our multi-generational Thanksgiving service, our bread communion. So please slice and place the bread in bags for people to take and eat later. And with that, goodbye, internet friends.